The Summer Summit has just happened like a few days ago, actually, so not that new anymore. And out of all the content in it, I think that the content that I really want to tackle and talk about is the Wrathmaw, the new world wilderness boss, which has been proposed by Jagex. Now, I have heard a lot about it, so in this video I thought I would just like throw my ideas out there, because ultimately I have seen a lot of people say a lot of things, but I think that it's important to understand the context that they are inserted in, and I think that people have somewhat to a point have been ignoring that. So if you don't know, the Wrathmaw is essentially this world boss that Jagex has come up with, and it's supposed to be the same as Breaches from Deadman mode. Deadman mode has had Breaches for like 2 or 3 editions now. They seem to work completely fine. People go there, they PVM for a bit, they try to kill each other for loot if they get loot. You know, it's a good old time that people tend to have. And I think that this is actually a really good thing, primarily because the Wrathmaw is pretty much better than anything Jagex has come up with the past 10 years when it comes to the wilderness. The main issue that the wilderness has had is that for the most part you have this mentality of predator versus prey, where the prey is killers and PVMers and overall people that just don't really want to engage with PvP. This creates a division in the community which tends to lead to a lot of spite voting on any PvP update, and given that the PvP community isn't exactly the biggest out there, yeah, it's not a good thing. It just overall creates a very toxic environment and doesn't really promote PvP, primarily because PVMers and skillers are already at disadvantage given that they have to sacrifice inventory spots and gear in order to, well, do PVM. So obviously someone that is geared purely for PvP will always have better gear and or at least more supplies than a PVMer, because a PVMer will need the PVM gear, the PvP gear, and supplies, and obviously that extra gear will sacrifice extra supplies they might have. And on top of that, most PKers don't really sacrifice that much. As much as people like to pretend that the wilderness is high risk, high reward, it really isn't. Let's face it. Yeah, sure, I mean, you know, some people are out there with their bofas and stuff like that. The vast majority of PKers aren't. That's just the reality. Right, now that's an entire thing that I need to address in a separate video with an entire wilderness thing, so I'm not gonna touch too much on it, but still, that's one of the main challenges. And over the past decade, pretty much, the Jagex's response to wilderness content was, well, PvP is dying, let's just throw some completely overpowered PVM content that is just the most broken drop table that will just kill the economy. That's what they have been doing for ages. So, you know, this boss, at least in that aspect, is not that bad. And why is it not that bad? Well, because before, with bosses like, you know, not Seractus, not Araxer, Venenaris, that's the name, or Vatian, for example, or the bear thing that Callisto is the name. I forget the names of the bosses. At least, like, those bosses, the point of those bosses was that they had the really good drop tables. Except that's it. They also had the Dragon Pickaxe, which eventually was taken away from the drop tables. I'm gonna think it was because it makes little to no sense to have to go into the wilderness to do a PVM boss in order for you to upgrade your pickaxe. It's really stupid, right? And that, right there, is the biggest difference between most content that has come out so far in the past decade for the wilderness versus the Wrathmaw. Because the Wrathmaw primarily gives you PvP related updates, or not updates, rewards, right? So you will get some better PvP weapons and, you know, or at least you will be able to make PvP related weapons like the AGS better. And that's a good thing. The PvP drops are mostly for the people that do PvP. While yes, you will have PVMers doing that piece of content, and while yes, you will definitely have people trying to profit or complete their, you know, collection logs once that comes out, the thing is, the vast majority of people constantly taking part in that are definitely going to be people that are into PvP. Why? The rewards. You see, most content in the wilderness up until this point has had really good drop tables, and by really good I mean lots of alchables and lots of scaling supplies, meaning they gave a lot of good GP. That was the incentive. Now, who are the people that usually do PVM for GP? Well, PVMers, of course, that's kind of the point. But that's exactly why the Wrathmaw might work when those bosses didn't. Because at this point with the Wrathmaw, you're not trying to get PVMers into the wilderness to try and earn a lot of GP, you're just telling PKers, hey, here's a spot that you can do PVM at, you can kill other people, but if you do manage to do enough damage to the boss, you might get a cool PvP upgrade. And that is the biggest distinction that I think people are completely glossing over. You are not just doing this because, well, it's good GP, it has a good drop table, and it's in a risky area, right? No, it has PvP drops. That right there is very important, alongside the fact that this boss is going to have a 6-hour spawn, meaning it's going to be the same as Breaches. That bodes really well. You're gonna get PKers all together into one spot, which is usually a really hard thing to do, which is why the breaches worked so damn well, because you're essentially putting a flare out and saying, hey, PKers, over here, there's content over here, you're gonna be able to PK over here, which currently is really hard to do. Look, there's a reason as to why all PvP games tend to put you in lobbies with other players and not in lobbies that are completely empty, that you need to, just continuously up until you find a lobby that actually has players. Yeah, it's so, you actually do PvP with other people, because that's kind of the point of playing a player versus player type game. Now, I have heard concerns, especially from people that have played RuneScape 3, over the time-gated nature of the Wrathmaw. I get it, right? I understand that RuneScape 3 is full of time-gated content, and honestly, it sucks. But again, we do need to understand the context of that content. Most of the time-gated content in RuneScape 3 promises you two things, either a lot of GP or a lot of fucking XP. Let's look at the Wilderness more specifically. The Wilderness has two big time-gated pieces of content, Warbands and the Wilderness Flash events. One of them, the Warbands, gives a lot of XP, and you can only do whatever every 7 hours. Wilderness Flash events happen every 4 hours, if I am not mistaken, or at least the big events happen every 4 hours, and they give you a lot of GP, because the stack of rewards actually has a lot of, good rewards related to GP. But that's the problem. RuneScape 3 for years and years and years now has always had the mentality that you skip grinds that players don't like. That's why a lot of time-gated content requires you to engage with it for 5 minutes every day, and you get showered with dozens of thousands of XP points. Like caches are a very good way to get 99, because every day you can, no joke, get like 50k div XP through caches. What's the point of training the skill when in 10 minutes you can get as much XP as someone would in like half an hour doing all of memories? But that takes work to do, right? And you're too busy, you can't do that. But with old school RuneScape, that doesn't happen. And not only does that not happen, well, for the most part, again, this is supposed to be a PvP thing. You are attracting PKers. Why? Because again, the point of the Wrathmaw is not that it has a really good drop table that will shower you with GP, but rather, you can get on your hands on PvP upgrades. And who are the players that are looking for PvP upgrades? PKers, of course. Right? So that is a really good mentality that the Wilderness needs. The Wilderness needs mostly two things for it to actually be fixed. PvP related content, and when I say PvP related content, I don't mean a monster that showers you with GP to attract PVMers so you have a place to kill PVMers. No, I mean like actual PvP related content and PvP related rewards. Up until this point, what are the rewards that you can exclusively get through PvP? If you go and look through PKR setups, even the more expensive ones, the Bofa comes from the Gauntlet, and so does the Crystal Armor. Fire Cape is a minigame, the Avas is a quest, the Void is a quest, Black Armor or Black DI, you can just buy it, Solid Robes, you can just buy it. So the declaws come from Chambers of Zerek, Armadillo, Godsword comes from, the Kriara God Wars Dungeon boss fight. My point is that pretty much you don't get PvP related weaponry or armor through PvP itself. And while granted, here you're not going to be killing other players for those things, you're going to be killing a boss. It's a boss that is in a PvP area that is supposed to be related to PvP. You can just walk up to the boss, deal damage as a PVMer, and go home. Maybe you can, but chances are you might get killed. And I bet that, honestly, whoever is killing this boss, chances are, and if Jagex wants to do this, they can make it so you actually get the drops directly at the boss. So if someone gets a really good drop, they might get killed. Now granted, a lot of people have been saying, oh, but clans are probably gonna dominate this. And I think that's fine. I think that one of the biggest issues has been having clans PvP actually in the wilderness. It's a shame that, we have, or, well, we don't have clans like Rot anymore, actually, but, it's a shame that, for the most part, some clans tend to be toxic, but, some clan wars sometimes it's fun to watch, it's fun to get yourself into, but that's kind of the problem. There really isn't any incentive in the wilderness to do that at, and given that the Wrathmaw is gonna have dynamic spawns, you never know which clan is gonna show up first. And, again, like, with the time-gated content, what you can do is simply change it after it's in the game. You can tweak it to make it way more common, you can make it a non-wilderness version that doesn't drop the PvP upgrades, you can make it so it spawns after a certain condition. For example, in Realm of the Mad Gods, some bosses only spawn after you kill other bosses in the world. Now granted, that's a roguelike, so it's not exactly one-to-one, but still, here you can do the exact same thing. You can have some mini-bosses roam the wilderness, and once they are killed, the Wrathmaw spawns after a certain amount of time, like 5 minutes or something like that. It's just something you can do. My point is, there's a lot that you can tweak to the boss to make it better and to make it work, but that's exactly the reason as to why I don't think we should just vote no. I think that it's really naive and short-sighted to vote no on potentially good updates just because in their current format they are not very good. I think Jagex has been showing they are really good, that after an update gets voted yes to be developed, they do develop it, they do actually ask for a lot of feedback and they trial things out, and I don't remember a piece of content in the game that was voted that players weren't happy with that never got fixed. Even things like combat achievements, for example, after a few years of being in the game, was changed to a point-based system because people just preferred that system. It was less of an inconvenience. So I think that we shouldn't put aside a potentially good update that actually goes in a good direction of making PvP related content in the wilderness as opposed to another, boss that attracts PvMers, that attracts weird PKers that don't actually fight back if you kill them, rather than, just actually trying to develop actual good bosses or actually good PvP activities that actually do encourage players to PvP. Is this perfect? Not by a long shot. There's plenty to be done still, there's plenty to be fixed, but personally, I think it's a step in the right direction. So even though I was completely ready to vote no, I'm gonna be honest, I'm probably gonna vote yes.